Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the entire world feels off. The conversations around you sound strange. The opinions repeated by friends and strangers alike seem almost scripted, and deep inside, you sense that something isn't right. It's not just eccentric behavior you're noticing, it's a kind of collective madness, as if logic, reason, and even basic self-awareness have quietly slipped away. Now pause for a second. What if you're not the one losing your mind? What if you're one of the few still awake in a world that has fallen under a spell? This is the unsettling reality of mass psychosis, an invisible force that can shape entire societies, turn rational individuals into echo chambers, and transform truth into something relatively fragile and easily manipulated. In this video, we are going to explore the hidden mechanics of this phenomenon. You will learn why it happens, how to recognize the warning signs, and most importantly, how to protect your mind from being swept into the current. And stay with me until the end, because the final revelation is not only the most powerful, it could shift the way you see yourself, others, and the reality you wake up to every single day. Let's be honest, human beings are not always rational. Despite centuries of philosophy, the discoveries of science, and all the tools of critical thinking at our disposal, history shows us again and again that societies can collapse not from external enemies, but from illusions they created themselves. Entire empires have been eroded by collective delusions. And this isn't something new. In the 17th century, René Descartes warned that our senses could deceive us, but even he might not have imagined just how much entire societies could deceive themselves. Psychologists today call it mass formation psychosis, a state where large groups of people lose touch with reality and instead cling to false narratives, emotional hysteria, or manipulative ideologies. It doesn't begin with monsters or dictators. It begins quietly with ordinary people longing for belonging, safety, and certainty, even at the cost of truth. And here's the chilling part: when mass psychosis takes hold, those who are awake are often seen as the crazy ones. The crowd doesn't just reject you. They may ridicule you, silence you, or even attack you for daring to question the illusion. But if you're watching this, you already sense that something is happening. You already feel the cracks forming in the story we've been told, and that awareness that discomfort is not a weakness. It's the first step toward freedom. To understand mass psychosis, we have to begin with the individual mind, because societies are nothing more than millions of individual psyches reacting together. And here lies the first uncomfortable truth: when people lose meaning, when they no longer feel anchored in something deeper than comfort or conformity, they become vulnerable to suggestion. The psychiatrist Carl Jung warned that when the psyche is cut off from purpose or spiritual grounding, it becomes dangerously open to collective illusions. In that empty space, people begin to search for identity, not within themselves, but in the herd. And the herd, as history has shown us, is often driven by fear propaganda and the desperate need to belong. Think about the last few years. Social media, endless news cycles, cultural wars. We've watched people repeat slogans they don't fully understand, defend movements they've never researched, and attack anyone who dares to ask simple questions. Is this progress, or is this the collapse of independent thought? The French thinker Gustave Le Bon described this dynamic clearly in his classic work, The Crowd. He showed that when individuals are absorbed into a group, they lose their sense of personal responsibility. They no longer act as rational adults, but regress into emotionally charged children, quick to rage, easy to manipulate, eager to conform. And that's the danger. The more disconnected people become from their own critical thinking, the easier it is for leaders, media, or trends to control them. Psychologist Solomon Asch even proved this in a simple experiment during the 1950s. He asked participants to compare the length of lines on a card. The correct answer was obvious. Yet when actors in the room intentionally gave the wrong answer, most participants under pressure went along with the group, ignoring the evidence of their own eyes. That is the terrifying power of social conformity. The need to belong can override even the clearest truth. Mass psychosis builds on this very weakness. Fear becomes the fuel. Fear of isolation, fear of ridicule, fear of standing alone. And when fear enters the equation, critical thought is the first casualty. But here's the hidden twist: mass psychosis isn't fueled by ignorance alone. Many of the people swept into it are intelligent, educated, and articulate. They're not lacking facts, they're lacking clarity. They know what to think because everyone tells them, but they've forgotten how to think for themselves. This is how collective madness begins, not with chaos, but with exhaustion. Questioning everything is hard. Going along feels safe, and slowly, almost silently, reason is surrendered. When mass psychosis takes hold, the effects ripple far beyond individual minds. It doesn't just distort perception, it reshapes culture, corrodes institutions, and rewrites the boundaries of what is considered normal. And the most unsettling part, it all feels invisible while it's happening. Consider this: once people surrender their independent judgment to the collective, truth itself becomes negotiable. What matters is not evidence, but consensus. What matters is not clarity, but compliance. And when consensus and compliance replace truth, society begins to drift into dangerous waters. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once observed, "Madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and ages it is the rule." He was not exaggerating. When collective illusions dominate it, questioning becomes dangerous, curiosity becomes heresy, and silence feels safer than honesty. Suddenly, intelligent conversation is replaced with slogans. Debate gives way to outrage. And the loudest voices, not the wisest ones, set the direction of the herd. We see this every day. News headlines designed to provoke emotion rather than inform. Social media rewarding outrage, not insight. Schools teaching memorization instead of critical thinking. The result is a society that confuses information with wisdom data, with truth, popularity with virtue. But there is a deeper consequence that's rarely discussed: hostility. When people abandon their own thinking, they don't simply become passive, they often become aggressive defenders of the illusion. Anyone who presents logic, evidence, or even calm reasoning threatens the fragile safety of the collective story. And so the crowd reacts with mockery, censorship, or rage, not because the information is false, but because it feels dangerous to their identity. This is why every totalitarian regime in history, no matter how irrational, found millions of ordinary supporters. These people weren't evil. They were trapped in a system that rewarded obedience and punished thought. They defended lies not because they loved lies, but because truth would have demanded the unbearable standing alone. And here is the tragic irony: many of the people lost in mass psychosis are not fools. They are doctors, teachers, leaders, people with degrees, titles, and status. But intelligence without awareness is like a ship without a compass. You can be brilliant and still utterly lost if you've outsourced your perception of reality to the crowd. So what is the real cost of mass psychosis? It's not just bad decisions or poor leadership. It's the erosion of sanity itself, where people forget not just what to think, but how to think. And that loss, if left unchecked, can dismantle an entire civilization from the inside. To see how mass psychosis develops, we need to look at its stages, because this descent into collective madness doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds step by step, almost predictably, like a psychological script that humanity has replayed throughout history. The first stage is disorientation. It begins with a vague sense that something is wrong. People feel unsettled, anxious, even helpless, but they can't quite explain why. The world feels chaotic. Old stories no longer make sense, yet nothing new has emerged to replace them. In this fog of uncertainty, the human mind craves order, even if that order is built on illusion. The second stage is simplification. A narrative appears, often delivered by media, the state, or charismatic leaders. This narrative offers clarity where there was confusion. It points to a clear villain, a clear solution, and it stirs up strong emotions. Complexity vanishes, nuance disappears. Suddenly, everything is divided into black or white, good or evil, us versus them. People are exhausted by uncertainty, so they latch on to this simplified story, not because it's true, but because it feels easier. Next comes the stage of conformity. The new belief system spreads not because everyone truly believes it, but because everyone thinks everyone else believes it. Psychologists call this pluralistic ignorance. Out of fear of isolation, people remain silent, and silence creates the illusion of consensus. It seems like everyone agrees, so dissent disappears, not because it has been destroyed, but because it's been hidden. Then comes aggression. Once the new reality takes hold, those who still resist are seen as threats. The crowd begins to enforce the new norms, punishing anyone who dares to step outside the narrative. Censorship grows. Debate dies. The questioner becomes the enemy. This is why totalitarian systems throughout history could count on loyal defenders, ordinary people convinced they were protecting truth, justice, or progress, when in fact they were defending illusions. Finally, there is awakening. Reality eventually pushes back. Lies collapse under their own contradictions. People begin to feel the tension between what they're told and what they actually experience. At first, the cracks are small and inner whisper. Is this really true? But once enough, people start to question, the spell begins to break. This awakening can be painful. It requires admitting that you were deceived, manipulated, or even complicit. Yet only through this painful clarity does true freedom return. Understanding these stages matters because once you can name them, you can see them happening in history and society, and even in your own mind. And recognition is the first step to resistance. Awakening sounds beautiful in theory, but in practice, it is one of the most difficult and painful stages of all. Why? Because waking up from mass psychosis means facing a brutal truth. Much of what you believed, defended, or even sacrificed for was never real. This shock has a name: cognitive dissonance. It is the gap between illusion and reality, between the story you were told and the evidence staring you in the face. And when that gap becomes too wide to ignore, the mind shakes. Some people retreat back into denial, clinging to comforting lies. Others, however, take the harder road. They choose truth no matter how uncomfortable it feels. The Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, wrote in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, that survival did not belong to the strongest or even the smartest. It belonged to those who carried an inner sense of purpose. Meaning was their anchor, something deeper that the madness around them could not destroy. That is the key to enduring the shock of awakening. You must tie your mind to something greater than public opinion, something that no crowd slogan or trend can strip away. But let's be honest, this is not easy. Seeing clearly in a blind world often feels heartbreaking. You may lose friends. You may be ridiculed. You may feel isolated. In fact, history shows us that many of the greatest truth seekers, Socrates, Galileo, Kierkegaard, Orwell, stood alone against the crowd. Yet their isolation was not weakness. It was proof that their clarity could not be bought or bent. Here's the paradox: illumination is rarely blissful at first. It can feel like disruption. When the light shines, it doesn't just reveal beauty, it exposes shadows, lies and distortions you didn't want to see. And once you've seen, you cannot unsee. That is the burden, but also the gift of awakening. Because in that painful clarity lies the beginning of freedom. It strips away illusions that kept you passive. It forces you to rebuild on a stronger foundation. And as you rise through the discomfort, you discover something extraordinary: the courage to live by truth, even when the world around you chooses the comfort of lies. So the question is, how do you stay mentally sovereign in a time when collective madness is spreading like a virus? How do you protect your clarity when almost everyone around you seems caught in hysteria? The answer is not complicated, but it does require practice. The first step is inner silence, not the silence of fear, but the silence of observation. Most people live reacting to every headline, every notification, every argument. But if you take a step back and simply watch your own thoughts, you begin to notice something shocking. Many of them are not even yours. They are echoes implanted by repetition. Ask yourself, where did this belief come from? Does it serve truth or just comfort? This habit of questioning is the first firewall for your mind. The second step is emotional discipline. Mass psychosis thrives on triggered minds. Outrage, fear, and constant reactivity make you easy to manipulate. Emotional discipline doesn't mean suppressing your feelings, it means mastering them. The next time a post makes you angry or a headline makes you afraid, pause. Ask, why am I reacting this way? Who benefits from this reaction? That moment of reflection breaks the spell. The third step is reconnection with meaning. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." If you don't anchor yourself to something deeper, philosophy, spirituality, art, service, nature, then the winds of propaganda will toss you anywhere they want. But when you are rooted in meaning, you become far harder to sway. The fourth step is building authentic community. And I don't mean echo chambers where everyone agrees with you. I mean finding people who value truth more than comfort, who are willing to question, to listen, to disagree with respect. One awakened mind is powerful, but many awakened minds connected by honesty and clarity can change the course of history. And finally, prepare yourself for the most radical shift of all, the realization that true freedom is not found in resisting the crowd, but in transcending the need for a crowd altogether. When your peace no longer depends on approval, applause, or belonging, you become untouchable. These practices are not glamorous. They don't happen overnight, but they are the daily habits that keep your mind sovereign while the collective storm rages on. And they are the foundation for the final revelation still to come. There comes a moment in every seeker's journey when the noise of the world fades and a new kind of silence emerges. This silence is not born of ignorance or avoidance. It is the silence of realization, the piercing clarity that allows you to finally see through the illusions around you. And when that moment arrives, something profound happens. You no longer need the crowd. At the root of mass psychosis lies not just fear of truth, but fear of standing alone with truth. Most people would rather be comforted by lies than face isolation. They would rather belong to a misguided majority than risk the loneliness of independent thought. That is why illusions spread so easily. They promise belonging. But here's the secret: once you learn to stand in your own presence, once your sense of identity is no longer tied to shifting social winds, you become free. True freedom is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is not constant resistance against the crowd. True freedom is the ability to walk alone in clarity, without bitterness, without despair, simply because truth has become your home. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard captured this when he wrote, "The crowd is untruth." He wasn't glorifying isolation. He was pointing to the reality that truth begins in the individual, the soul that dares to know itself without mirrors. When your identity depends on reflection, you are always at the mercy of distortion. But when your identity is rooted in direct awareness, it becomes unshakable. And here is what terrifies systems of mass control. You cannot manipulate a person who no longer fears rejection. You cannot silence a mind that has found its own compass. Every mechanism of psychological control, whether political, ideological, or cultural, depends on dividing people from their inner core. Once they doubt themselves, they become easy to direct. But when they remember who they are, the game is over. So the journey is not about becoming something new. It's about remembering what you've always been before the noise buried it: a mind capable of clarity, a spirit capable of truth. Awakening, then, is not discovery, it is recovery. And yes, recovery can be painful, but it is also the beginning of true sovereignty. Awakening is rarely gentle. It feels less like a new beginning and more like a loss. Because to truly remember who you are, you must also grieve for who you were, the years spent inside illusions, the friendships built on falsehoods, the truths you denied in order to survive. This grief can feel heavy, almost unbearable. But here's the paradox: grief is not the end. It is the doorway to strength. When you strip away the layers of programming, shame, guilt, and fear, you don't become someone new, you return to what you were before the world buried you. And in that return, a profound shift happens. You stop reacting, you start observing, you stop chasing approval, you start seeking alignment, you stop fearing the madness of others, you start mastering your own mind. From this space of recovery, a new kind of energy radiates from within you. It's not charisma, it's not social status, it's not even intelligence. It is coherence, the alignment of thought, word, and action. It is integrity made visible, and others can feel it. Some will be drawn to it because it resonates with a buried truth inside themselves. Others will be threatened by it because it exposes the hollowness of their illusions. But either way, your peace will no longer depend on their perception. This is the ultimate escape, not fleeing from the world, not raging against the crowd, but no longer needing validation from it. From here, true transformation begins not through shouting or preaching, but by embodying an alternative. When you live as proof that another way is possible, you don't need to force awakening onto others. They sense it in your presence. This is how awakening spreads, not by argument, but by resonance, not by manipulation, but by example. And this is exactly what mass psychosis fears most: the awakened individual. Because one individual truly awake and deeply rooted has more power than 10,000 confused minds. So if you've come this far, if you've endured the grief and embraced the clarity, you are already different. You are no longer just another voice in the noise. You are part of a quiet rebellion, a rebellion of consciousness, integrity, and freedom. Every system of mass control, whether political, ideological, or cultural, operates on one simple principle: divide the self. Make people doubt their own inner compass, and they will desperately seek direction from the outside. Once that happens, their reality can be scripted for them. But here's the hidden truth: your compass was never broken. It was only buried under layers of shame, guilt, ridicule, and fear. And once you begin to recover it, once you realize that your mind is capable of clarity without permission, you become immune to manipulation. This is why every age has feared the awakened individual. Not because such a person is loud, but because they are unshakably quiet. They don't need validation. They don't fear rejection. And you cannot control a person who has made peace with standing alone. From this foundation, something extraordinary happens. You begin to radiate a presence that cannot be explained by titles, credentials, or social status. It's the energy of coherence, your thoughts, words, and actions finally in alignment. Some will feel inspired by it, others will feel threatened, but none will be able to ignore it. And here's the real revolution: you don't fight mass psychosis by arguing with the crowd. You don't win by proving others wrong or shouting louder. You win simply by existing as proof that another path is possible. Your very presence becomes the antidote. Think of the great voices of history: Socrates, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, or even the quiet mystics whose names never made it into the textbooks. Their power was not in aggression, but in presence. They embodied truth so fully that it unsettled the illusions around them. They didn't need everyone to agree with them. They only needed to remain aligned with themselves. And this is what mass psychosis fears most: the individual who has remembered themselves. Because one person in clarity destabilizes 10,000 in confusion. It doesn't take armies of awakened people, it only takes sparks. Sparks that ignite others, not through debate, but through resonance. So if you are listening to this now, understand you are not powerless. You don't need to convert the whole world. You only need to guard your own clarity. Because every awakened mind weakens the collective illusion, and every awakened soul becomes a beacon for others, still lost in the fog. So now the question becomes deeply personal. What kind of world do you want to live in? A world ruled by noise, hysteria, and blind obedience? Or a world where individuals are awake, courageous, and sovereign? The truth is, it starts with you. Every illusion that grips society survives only because individuals choose silence over honesty, comfort over clarity, and conformity over courage. The choice is rarely easy. Speaking your truth may feel terrifying. Your voice may tremble. You may stand alone. But history shows us that change never begins with the majority. It begins with the few who refuse to surrender their minds. Stand your ground even if you stand alone. Because when one person dares to embody truth, it creates a ripple that spreads further than they can imagine. Others still trapped in the fog will see that light and remember something ancient within themselves, a whisper that says, "I too can be free." This is the quiet rebellion of our time. Not a rebellion of rage, but of clarity. Not a rebellion of destruction, but of presence. You don't need to panic. You don't need to fight the crowd. You only need to refuse to hand over your awareness. Every time you question instead of blindly accept, you weaken the grip of the illusion. Every time you choose integrity over approval, you help bend reality back towards sanity. Yes, the madness of the world may continue. People may cling to false stories because they fear isolation more than they fear lies. But if you choose clarity, then even while the storm rages, you carry peace within you. That peace becomes unshakable when it is no longer tied to how others perceive you. And this is the essence of evolution, not escape, but transformation. You don't need the world to collapse before you awaken. You only need the courage to stop outsourcing your identity to the crowd. So ask yourself right now, will you choose the comfort of conformity or the discomfort of truth? Will you let the crowd decide who you are, or will you reclaim the compass buried inside you? Because the world doesn't need more clever followers. It needs conscious leaders. And whether you realize it or not, you have the power to become one. There is a moment in every journey of awakening when the world's madness no longer feels like a threat. You watch it rage, twist, and roar, but instead of being consumed by it, you begin to see through it. And in that moment, you realize something profound: the revolution you've been searching for was never outside. It was always within. True liberation is not about escaping the world. It's not about hiding from society or fighting endlessly against the crowd. It is about remembering yourself so fully that no illusion can take you hostage again. When you no longer need approval, applause, or belonging to feel whole, you are free. Mystics and philosophers across the ages pointed toward this truth. They called it enlightenment, illumination, awakening. And though their words differed, their message was the same: freedom does not come from conquering others, but from mastering yourself. Søren Kierkegaard was right when he said the crowd is untruth. Not because people are inherently wicked, but because truth begins in the individual, one soul daring to know itself without mirrors. When you arrive here, grief turns into gratitude. You no longer mourn the years lost in illusion, you honor them as the path that brought you home. You no longer fear the loneliness of standing apart, you embrace it as the sign that you are no longer chained to falsehood. And you no longer need to convince anyone, you live as proof that another way is possible. From this place, transformation radiates, not through arguments, not through force, but through resonance. Your clarity becomes contagious. Your peace becomes magnetic. Some will resist it, some will attack it, but others will quietly awaken because of it. That is how truth spreads, not like fire consuming everything, but like light breaking the darkness. And this is the great irony: the system of mass psychosis fears you more than anything else. Not because you are violent, not because you are loud, but because you are free. One individual, deeply rooted, immune to fear, cannot be controlled. And one such individual has more power than 10,000 confused minds. So let the world do what it must. Let the illusions rise and fall. You no longer need them to validate you. You have found something deeper, you have found yourself. And in finding yourself, you have already begun the quiet revolution.